All right, welcome to Witchpolice Radio. I'm here with a returning guest. I was trying to think of when the last time I talked to you was, and I think it was right at the beginning of the pandemic. And the reason that I mentioned that is because, well, first of all, before we do any of that, why don't you introduce yourself and give a bit of background about who you are and what you do? Because I like to start the shows that way and get the guests to sort of give their own take on what it is they do as an artist.
Okay, sure. My name is Scott Nolan. I'm a songwriter and musician from Winnipeg, Manitoba.
Cool. And so, like I was saying, I had you on a few times on the show, and the last time was I think at the beginning of the pandemic because you had this big lineup of shows scheduled for the Park Theater. It was a residency, and it was a very exciting thing that was happening as a way to make shows happen during a time when shows weren't really happening very much. And that obviously because of the way things went with COVID and with restrictions and things like that, that didn't really happen. Did it happen at all, or was it?
It happened once, yeah, and it was fairly early on in the pandemic, but it was early in a pretty serious part of it. People were, it was the beginning of being afraid.
Yeah.
So we got a very modest audience, and I mean, we started the idea at the West End when we were recording this record, and kind of took it further at the park. And the basic idea was, where you have the groups in the center of the room and the audience around the group. And I remember, I can't remember if it was the Maddies. It was somebody that I'm familiar with that come to a lot of shows that said to me, we chose to sit behind Joanna. Like, so, you really could kind of go in the room and go, I think I'd like to sit behind Joanna and see the mechanics of that and what it sounds like and feels like that from that part of the room. And so you had that visual, and then of course the sound was, you know, um, comparable to a normal show. So
Yeah.
Glenn Buer that I've made this new record with, he did this kind of stuff a bit with him and Bramwell Tovey started the New Music Festival.
Okay.
And I remember when I first went, it was Joanna Miller, in fact, that took me to my first one, and I'd never seen classical or symphony music performed, and so it was the new music, and there were bleachers on the stage. And I remember going in and going, "What the?" And she said, "Oh, we could go sit up there if you want." I thought, "Oh my God, I couldn't believe it." And so it's very different. It's very different than your traditional audience member thing, and so yeah, it was that we were trying to kind of do that, create a little bit of the Blue Note vibe, where we would have tried to keep it um, tight but loose. So every week was different and different material. And yeah, I mean, that's how I started and built up my career, at least locally, was doing these things that, looking back at them now, whether it was deliberate or not, it was almost like some sort of installation of sorts where you saw something really grow. 10 years at the Bella Vista alone,
Yeah.
the songwriting grew. If you cared for it, you could see all this stuff happening in real time. Which I think is that's what I grew up seeing and being influenced by. So
Well, it's a cool way to sort of even over a short period to sort of grow with the artist that you're going to see as well. I mean, just watching the ins and outs, whether it's night after night or month after month or however something like that is set up, just give them a chance to especially when with songs that are often developing too on stage. I mean, you can see different versions and the way that things kind of change until you hear the finished recorded version, and that's might be different than the past three times you heard the song.
and even after the recorded version, I mean, ultimately, one thing's for sure: the Holmes brothers, who got to know the great gospel blues group. I mean, they really made clear to me the concept of the whole being greater than the sum of its parts, and that the drummer could speed up and slow down, and there were certain things that were like maybe musical vulnerabilities within the group, but when the three men played together,
Yeah.
they had something that you couldn't, no level of kind of virtuosity could achieve that. It was just physical hours in a room, in church, through boyhood, to
Yeah.
where I feel like Joanna and I have this, and Paul Kane, who is playing in the group, he has on and off from my whole career. He's always kind of, maybe almost right away, had that
Okay.
some ability to, or willingness, to to hear whatever it was I was trying to do and augment it, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so and I mean, obviously, this whole situation the world has been in, this has clearly affected the plans to release this record. I'm sure. I mean, it's been 2 years. I imagine you had some of those songs figured out well before this release that's coming up. What has it been like, sort of having this kind of enforced, separation from other musicians that you would normally be working with on a regular basis, and just this sort of, I guess, enforced solitude, really, over the past 2 years, as a creative person, as an artist.
I already really lived that way, to be truthful.
Yeah.
But actually, maybe had less of an impact on me than many. And this project, it was already kind of an over a few years kind of concept in that I had written the songs and created these work tapes that kind of were where Glenn began
Okay.
initially creating arrangements and then ultimately creating kind of what we both call expansions, because there is a collaborative thing that happened. He's taking music I wrote, but he's reimagining certain parts of it, and it was really at my encouragement. The first couple things we did were kind of very thoughtful and brilliant arrangements. But I was the one that kind of encouraged him to turn up the you could turn up the Glen.
Okay.
I could hear a little bit more of that in there, and then to me, I feel like it was a song on the record called "Patron Saint of Broken Hearts." I feel like there was that shift where suddenly there was like this really long intro and long outro to an otherwise regular Scott Nolan song, and I thought, oh my, that was the first time I had a wow, like I was really the possibilities and the beauty of it became like I thought, okay, that's so. But it was already over a long term thing, so no, I don't know really. I can't say as I have little to complain about, and the
Right.
timeline of this project. Um, I don't know that it was that impacted. The waiting on the vinyl was a little bit impacted, but even that, and I think Glenn and I have this in common. I mean, for me, I've been doing this particular type of thing, which is different than what he does for a long
Mhm.
time, and the urgency's not what it was for me as a 20 or 30-year-old person. I've never, in fact, I've never even looked at like Spotify numbers, and I've never touched any of those things.
Yeah.
Convinced myself a long time ago, for better, for worse, whatever they were, probably wouldn't be good for me some way or another. Really
Yeah. I
good.
know what you mean. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know what's it worth to my goal and my kind of so. But anyway, so yeah, we had to we hired Roberta Landreth, who helped us do this beautiful layout. So there was layers to this, the LP in particular. We wanted to make something that was a substantial piece of art that you could hold in your hands, and so there's a booklet, and there's a lot of my collages in there, as well as
Yeah.
a beautiful lithograph from Charles Simpson from, I don't know, 1930 maybe. And so there's all these kind of neat things. So it was like, yeah, there was a lot to it. So I never really felt rushed or worried. And then we started working with a little kind of very small, I think, PR firm in Montreal that are already kind of already showing us all the things we don't know. So it's fun. It's different than, the record business has changed, for one, even since I
Oh yeah.
last put out a record, and I've never really done those jobs, so I don't bring any skill to the table in a lot of regards. So yeah, the timeline's been fine for me, and even the show coming up. Um, the way this whole thing began was the Penderecki String Quartet were here in Winnipeg playing, I believe, the Agassiz Festival,
Okay.
and Glenn, they're all old dear friends. Glenn, they were all at Laurier University in Kitchener Waterloo, in the music program for years. So it, you know, from him and I kind of creating this in our minds to like, okay, here we go. Here's the arrangements and charts.
Yeah.
We, I got the Penderecki string quartet. Now they just happen to be back, you know. So and really the even with the timing of it, part of the reason we chose the matinee was it was their last day here, and I thought, geez, I have no problem with a matinee show, and they're kind of interesting and fun, and
Yeah.
so yeah, like the way this whole project began, we're going to release it locally. That same way, like, oh, geez, we're all in one place. Let's just do this right now, and so yeah, it's all kind of just things take their natural course. I stopped
Sure.
fighting those currents. They can really exhaust you, and that's a young person's struggle, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
All
Well,
the details.
what is it I mean, this is maybe a better question for Glennon, but he's not here, but what do you think it is that he um sees in your songwriting that works for him? Because I mean, there's obviously, something that you hear in his music that made you want to collaborate with him, but what do you think it is that the other way around, what do you think it is that he has kind of found when listening to your previous music that made him want to collaborate with you?
Well, he when he first approached me, it was just a very thoughtful um, note that he sent me. And I mean, Glenn, like myself, he writes songs, he plays guitar and different stuff, more in the realm of what I do, but also is known kind of professionally more in the classical, and I think in some cases jazz kind of world. Um, when we met, a couple things came up. Um, right away with us. I mean, he'd kind of introduced himself and talked about his background and stuff, and then was curious. Um, my background's not a formal one, so
Hmm.
his curiosity is coming from a formal background and being a essentially a doctor of music. He's taught and trained countless musicians. He had an interest in my production and that sort of stuff from a non-schooled point. So he was curious about how I might have arrived at some of these um, places, and then ultimately, he was talking about classical music and saying, even going back to the new music years, the audience that keep those symphonies working are an older audience, and they don't want new music. They
Yeah.
want the old songs, and so he was just kind of, asking my thoughts on, how do how do we retain relevancy in this case in the classical world. And I kind of my immediate response was the folk thing, thinking about some conversations I'd had with Mitch Podolak and kind of being exposed to his world as a young guy and not a folk guy at all,
Yeah.
just kind of watching it. And like there was some cultural stuff and some political stuff. There was lots to it. It was a different world for me. And folk, as I saw it as a young guy, just observing it, it wasn't like just the type of song that you sang. It was how you maybe identified and lived and your values and these sorts of things. And so I'd kind of suggested to Glenn that I think maybe what we've hit at this kind of 100 some odd year mark is people want to hear their stories again. Their hear their street names, their neighborhoods,
Yeah.
and these songs I'd been writing. I mean, historically for me, I write when I travel, and so much of my career, the locations I'm being influenced by are often American cities. It's just kind of happenstance, right? And
Yeah.
I stopped traveling and began living a quieter life, I suppose I would call it. I really immediately began writing about my neighborhood and what was around me, and I'd become aware of there was a number of local painters that lived around here and sculptors, and so I was like, oh, I'd become really fascinated by that, and that's what these songs became. They were our street names and our stories, and so in a way, that first meeting we had, you know, it kind of led to this, and I feel like that's what this is. I don't feel like it's a roots Americana guy with strings. It's not that,
Right. Right.
you know.
Yeah.
And I have, I honestly have no real prediction. Yeah, strangely, how people will respond to it. But I feel really, I joke to somebody that heaven forbid it's the last thing I ever get to do. I could live with that. And part of that reason is it as different as it sounds, it's still what I've always done, and maybe just kind of a richer, broader palette and some different instrumentation. But one thing's for sure, it was kind of a dream to get to explore these songs this way. And I think about something Towns Van Zandt said. His three favorite artists, I believe, were Lightning Hopkins, David Olney, and Beethoven,
Okay.
and maybe it was Mozart. Anyway, I got to know David Olney and played on a session with him one time, and I could see immediately what Towns saw in him, and there was like a Shakespearean thing and a classical thing. It was really authentic, really interesting, really like well informed human being, and wrote these, really, I mean, utterly unique songs. So
Yeah.
again, I think of getting to work with Glenn, it's like, who would have I hadn't even dreamt it yet, to kind of get to expand these ideas. And
Yeah. Well, I like what you said a minute ago about the sense of place in songs, and that you were influenced in your travels, and by other countries and other cities and where you were at the time. I always like hearing music, regardless of genre. I find that a lot of really good hip hop does this well, where they are talking about a very very specific location, like whether it's it could be right down to a, like you're saying, a neighborhood rather than a city, rather than a country. And even if I don't have a frame of reference for where they are. I haven't been there. I'm living in Winnipeg, but I like it when you get so kind of absorbed into that place, and you feel like you recognize it, even if it's so outside your own experience. And I think that I mean, as a listener of music in general, I feel like people do it either one way or the other. They do that and really immerse you in that location they're singing about or rapping about or whatever, or it seems distant and it seems like a separate thing that you can't really understand. And so, do you feel like this record is something that people who aren't from the area, people who are from other countries, other cities, will be able to find themselves in these locations you're talking about, in these street
sure,
names, in
yeah,
these?
I mean, I hope so. Again, I don't know if I get to make
Sure.
that comment, but I think so. I hope so. And um, the suburbs are a theme. There are themes that are, I think, fairly universal. And there's like there's audio. It's kind of autobiographical in a way. Not in like a schmaltzy hokey way, but um, there's a song called Candy from kind of my very young boyhood, that I kind of refer to as my first kind of older woman, and that she was a couple years older than me, but um, had more experience than me. I was aware of it even as a kid.
Yeah.
Uh, I was with this girl that felt like tough and cool and like like she knew shit I didn't.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, I remember kind of really feeling that, and so all these years later, it came out in a little song for her, and I think there's yeah, I hope so. I love that about John Sampson. I think
Yeah.
people think about and wonder about Winnipeg by his songs, and I think people see my Winnipeg, my guy man, and hopefully like, you know, uh, um, in fact, yeah, I know these things are ready to be true. So I hope that this is my I hope mine has that kind of impact too. And but even yeah, it just the whole thing's been a great experience. It's all these last bunch of years that kind of tie together my book of poetry, which is very influenced by this immediate area. I
Yeah.
mean, there's poems in that book that have become songs on this record, and so I had never really done that. Writing poetry was still new enough to me that I hadn't yet just kind of put a poem to music. So there's no traditional kind of rhyming or patterns that I would normally use in songwriting. So I did that, which was a kind of opened up a new area to explore. And then the book of poetry, the cover was a collage that was gifted to me by Guy Madden. I hadn't yet
Okay.
made a collage myself ever, and the the book was made under a period where I was kind of struggling with some issues that I needed to deal with and overcome, and that kind of became the reward, I think, for the effort of doing it. And then to flash forward to another moment of difficulty for me, and collage, just like I've had of just instantly became a thing, and I dove really kind of headfirst into that, and so this record is interesting in that it's all those things in one place.
Yeah.
The last 3 years, or I'd say even more, are all in this record. So it's and when I say I have no idea how people react to it, kind of what I mean by that is I might hope that it was like over a bottle of red wine or something. My hope, I don't know. My late friend Patrick O'Connell, when he gave me new work of his, like particularly gave me a chapbook toward the end of his life called Repertoire for Beggars.
Okay.
And he asked me to read it in one sitting. Like I remember getting a kick out of the fact that he'd give me this work of his, but then asked me if you don't mind, could you read it in one sitting? And I won't do that myself, but yeah, my hope is that people hear it that way. I don't know if hearing it in the car maybe is, I don't know. It's just but I think it's something that you can kind of engage with. And another reason I like the LP part of it is, it's broken into sides
Yeah.
that I think have a nice quality. If you ever saw, there was a play years ago, I Dream of Diesel. Did you ever see that?
I don't think so. No.
It was based on a collection of songs of mine from over the years, and it was One Trunk Theater Company. It was an amazing, amazing thing, and I'd never dreamt of such a thing. That it just here it is, and I loved getting to know the writers and the directors and the team, and I had some influence on the script a little bit just by telling stories of my life, and then ultimately there was like a 2 or 3 week kind of sold out run of it, and I don't know how many times I went. I couldn't believe it,
Yeah.
and I went for a walk recently with the woman that wrote that play, and just said, given how beautiful I Dream of Diesel was, I feel like this record is, it's dying to be realized that way. And so,
Cool.
and we talked about ideas I had already, and you know, I've really come to the point where I realize I love this is the part I love the most about these things, um, is the just the building it, seeing
Yeah.
seeing how far you can kind of take it and stretch it, and yeah, I could put this record out and tour exhaustively all over the place and do all that kind of stuff, or I could just keep building it till I feel like okay, that's it, But anyway, in the meantime, we got the matinee coming up, and yeah, it's exciting. It's been a heck of a journey.
What are the details on the matinee? Because people will be hearing this before the show happens. So, how do people check it out and get
Tickets,
tickets, all that stuff?
I believe tickets are 30 or $35. They're a little more than our average ticket, maybe, but I mean, we got the incredible string quartet with joining our regular group, which is very exciting. And
Yeah.
it's a 2 p.m. show. It's geez, I hope I got all this right.
Well,
Sunday,
I'll link to it too in the show notes so people can find it that way too. So yeah.
yeah, Sunday, June the 12th. It's kind of we're doing it in collaboration with the West End Cultural Center, and I just it's the right venue. We recorded part of the record there,
Oh, cool.
and I've been working with Jorge on some visual projects in my studio, and so yeah, just it's exciting to how easily this music will travel, or you know we've already had one additional show um, come up from this one that isn't quite yet confirmed, but so it's exciting. I just it's new to me, and another nice thing is Glenn and I have produced the record together,
Yeah.
and he's also kind of executive produced the whole affair. So I'm really kind of happy to ride shotgun and like, um, yeah, I like a great team, and I'm not super fussy on what you know. I mean, my strengths are clear, and the rest aren't strengths. So to have a great team, or people assume things are good at, and Glenn is really terrific at. I love how he treats musicians. There's such structure and detail. You know, People get paid well and treated well. I love that stuff. So I can kind of happily just let him take charge because a lot of details.
Yeah.
While making all these schedules work, and for as many times as we've done this, he'll continually have to alter the charts now because this configuration is unique to anything we've done yet. So he has to go in and make new arrangements to suit the instrumentation, but it's another reason why it's just an exciting thing to capture in its kind of infancy because
Yeah.
um, like all those years of Bella Wednesdays and stuff, you really get to see it's a different vantage. The last time we did this at the WEC was with a 12-piece chamber orchestra.
Oh well, it's
So
it's
now
gonna be a different vibe. Yeah.
yeah, now there's nine of us, and it's still the broad scope musically, but I love that it's kind of anchored in our group, and Glenn and I share a lot of history with it's kind of I worked with this group really, with the exception of Glenn, um, Gilles Fournier, Joanna Miller, and Paul Balkin go back to my first record, so they've been with me my whole career in some capacity. So that's also pretty cool, and we all
Yeah.
met and began our friendships and relationships at the Blue Note. So
Everything goes back to Blue Note, eh?
yeah,
It
well,
ties everything to it. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of other important places, but
Sure.
there's a lot of mojo in that reality, right? That we one that we're still friends after all this time.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's hard to do. It's hard to do because you move around, you play with one group, you play with another. It's different for songwriters, I think, a little bit than musicians because sometimes it can be insensitive. A musician might wonder why they're on one gig and they're not on another, or they're not on the record but they're on the gig. There's so much to that stuff, and sometimes you can overlook the details. Again, that's why I like this with Glenn, where there's it's a real refined kind of process where everybody gets the same information. It's good information. It's
Yeah.
you know
Yeah. Very cool.